Hello everyone. Welcome on lecture on structural organization in animals. So in the lecture we learned about various types of tissues. Like for example, we learned about epithelial tissues. Then we learned about connective tissues. We know majorly there are four types of tissues like epithelial, connective, muscular tissues, and then we have another type of tissue which is the nervous tissue. So in today's lecture, we will cover the remaining one, that is the muscular tissue and the nervous tissue. So starting with the introduction, we know that human body or for any living organism, the body is made up. The initial level is the chemical level, where the body is made up of either the organic compounds and the inorganic compounds. So certain organic and inorganic compounds make up the chemical level, various chemicals that are present inside our body. For example, various amino acids like phenylalanine, etc. are present within the body of animals, and this is the chemical level. Then we have a cellular level, that is at the level of the cell. So at the cellular level, we have various cells. We know that cells are the basic unit of life. So they are the structural and the basic structural and functional unit of life, and they are the basic unit that makes up the living organism. So after this, the cells, we have the tissue level of organization, that is the group of cells that are directed to attain a particular structure or are attained to perform a particular function. So it can be various types of tissues, for example, epithelial tissues like cuboidal epithelium, squamous epithelium, or they may be smooth muscles, etc. After this, we have an organ level of organization. So various tissues combine to form a particular organ that has a particular function. Right? For example, kidney has many roles. Like for example, it has function of reabsorption, it has function of excretion, so it helps in the excretion, it helps in the osmoregulation, etc. So it is made up of various tissues. It is not only composed of epithelial tissues, but is composed of various kinds of tissues. And then after this, we have an organ system level of organization. So various organs, like for example, kidney, urinary bladder, hair, these are combined in a particular structure to attain a particular, in a particular fashion, to perform a particular function. For example, the kidney, urinary bladder, ureter, etc. are combined to form a complete excretory system. So they form a complete organ system. They have this is known as the organ system level of organization. And after this, we have an organism level where different organ systems like excretory system, circulatory system, digestive system, etc., which are present within the organism, leads to the formation of a complete organism. So this is an organism level of organization. Starting with the basic chemical unit, we have a complete organism that is being formed. So we know that chemicals make up the body, and they may be divided into two major categories like inorganic or organic. The next is the cells. So the smallest living unit of structure and functions are the cells. They are the basic unit of life. And every living organism is made up of cells. Then we have, as I mentioned, tissue is a group of cells with similar structure and function. So these cells are acquired a particular structure and a function and form a tissue. They have an organ level of organization, which is a group of tissues which are precisely arranged to accomplish a specific function. As I mentioned, like for example, in kidney, there are various tissues which are arranged to perform a particular function like excretion or osmoregulation, etc. The next is the organ system. So an organ system is a group of organs that all contribute to a particular function. As I mentioned, urinary bladder, kidney, etc. leads to the excretion. Here, for example, so this is just example. So it will be excretory system that composed of various organs. So this is the introduction of different levels of organization within the living organism. Then we classify various tissues into various types, starting with the epithelial tissues. So we have already discussed epithelial tissues. The function of epithelial tissues is that they provide the protection by covering. So there are various types of epithelial that we discussed. The first one was the squamous one, which is the flattened one. The second one is the cuboidal, which is cubical. Then we have columnar, which is the pillar-like. So it forms a pillar-like structure. And squamous one is the flattened one. Then we have ciliated, in which the cilia is present on the columnar epithelial tissues. And then we have glandular, which is the secretory epithelial tissue. And these are also known as the glands. So there were various glands. For example, we discussed about the sweat glands. Then we discussed about the glands that secretes the insulin, for example, pancreas. So there may be various glands. Some may be exocrine, some may be endocrine, or some may be mixed. Then in the last lecture, we discussed about the connective tissues. Connective tissues provides the support and helps in the transportation. There are various kinds of connective tissues. Areolar connective tissue, that consists of air spaces, usually present in the lungs. Then we have adipose tissue that consists of fat cells. We have supporting tissues like tendons and ligaments that help in the joining of bone to bone and bone to muscles. We have cartilage and bones that act as a skeletal system and provides the support and strength. Then we have fluid connective tissue that includes the blood and the lymph. So in today's lecture, now we discuss about the muscular tissues. Muscular tissues help in the movement and locomotion. They are also connected with the connective tissue through ligaments and tendons. So there are various types of muscular tissue like striated muscular tissue, non-striated muscular tissue, and cardiac tissue. We will see why they are named so, because their name is specific. So we will see why they are named so. Then we have nervous tissue that helps in the control and organization. So nervous tissue, the one thing that we discuss is have the lowest power of regeneration. Like once they get degenerate, it is difficult to regenerate those cells. So starting with the muscular tissue, muscular or the contractile tissue is composed of cells called muscle fibers. So these are composed of cells called muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are composed of actin filaments and myosin filaments. So muscle fibers are made up of actin and myosin. And the interaction between this actin and myosin helps their movement. The muscles are important in the generation of body heat. Therefore, it helps in the thermoregulation also. There are three distinct types of muscular tissues as I discussed: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Why they are named so, we will see. Now, each type differs in appearance, their physiology and function, and that is why they are named so. So their appearance is different, like they can be striated or they can be non-striated. They may be voluntary, they may have voluntary function, or they may be involuntary, etc. So based on these, different muscular tissues are being classified. So starting with the skeletal muscles, as the name suggests, skeletal muscles. So therefore, they must be associated with the skeletal system, right? So skeletal muscles may also be called as striated muscles or voluntary muscles. This is very important. We remember skeletal muscles are also known as striated muscles or voluntary muscles. Why they are called as striated muscles and why they are named so, skeletal muscle and voluntary muscle. So the skeletal muscles, as we can see in the figure, they are cylindrical in nature. So they have several nuclei, each and actually striated or striped. So you can see here in the figure, these are the cylindrical cells. So these are cylindrical cells and they have several nuclei each. So each of these have various nuclei, many nuclei, like you can see here in this. So each of them have various nuclei that are striped. So they have stripe-like structures, or they are striated, and therefore they are called as striated muscle. So since they consist of various nuclei, how they must be formed? By the fusion of various cells. So during the development, they arrive by the fusion of various cells, resulting in one fiber, multiple nuclei. So it is one fiber with multiple nuclei. These are cylindrical, these are one fiber with multiple nuclei formed by the fusion of many cells during their development. Nuclei ka position, the nuclei are located at the periphery of the cells. So you can see here that the nucleus is usually located at the periphery of the cells. So at the end of the cells, it is usually located just inside the plasma membrane. The fibers have alternating light and dark bands, giving them the striated appearance. So they have a alternate light and dark bands. You can see here, giving them the striated appearance. So they have dark bands, they have light bands, giving them striped or striated pattern. Therefore, they are called as skeletal muscles or striated muscles, and these perform their function voluntarily. That is, they can regulate their functioning, movement, and therefore they are voluntarily. They can act voluntarily, and therefore they are also known as voluntary muscles. So the striations are the result of the precise arrangement of the contracting proteins. So we know it has actin and myosin within the cells. So these striations are the result of those contracting proteins which are present within the cells. These contracting proteins are actin and myosin. These bands are due to the placement of actin filament, myosin filaments. Depending on in which condition the muscle is, it will form a dark band or a light band on the basis of the contracting proteins which are actin and myosin. Now, skeletal muscle tissue makes up the muscles that are attached to the bones. That is why they are called as skeletal muscles. Why? Because they are attached to the skeletal system, they are attached to the bones. These muscles are supplied with the motor nerves and thus move the skeleton. So, motor nerves are the one that helps in the movement, and therefore it helps in moving the skeleton. They also produce significant amount of heat, which is important to maintain the body's constant temperature. Each muscle has its own motor nerve ending, so therefore it can be regulated. Since they have their own motor nerve ending, it can be regulated and therefore they can act voluntarily. The nerve impulse that can then travel to the muscles are essential to cause contraction. The nerve impulse for them originate in the cerebrum, which is the thinking part of the brain, and therefore they can function voluntarily because the nerve impulse are sent to the part of the brain that acts voluntarily, which is the thinking part of the brain, and therefore they can regulate the movement depending on the situation. This is the smooth muscles. So smooth muscles, which are also known as the visceral muscles. Why they are called as visceral muscles? Because why they are called smooth muscles? Because they lack the striations. You can see here there is no striped like pattern. So no stripes are present. So therefore it lacks striations and it is called as smooth muscle. Why they are called as visceral muscle? Because they are present in visceral organs. Because they are present in visceral organs. So they have a spindle shaped cells, unlike these striated muscles which are cylindrical, they have a spindle shaped cells. So you can see here, these are spindle shaped, right? They form layers in which the thick middle portion of one cell is opposite the thin ends of the adjacent cell. You can see here in this, the thick middle portion of the one cell is near the periphery of the other cell, which is thin. So they form a layer-like structure, and consequently the nuclei form an irregular pattern in the tissue. Smooth muscle is not under voluntary control, and therefore they are also said to be involuntary. Therefore, we can call smooth muscles as visceral muscles, unstriated muscles, or involuntary muscles. That is, they cannot function on their own. So this is about the smooth muscle introduction. We can differentiate between smooth muscles and striated muscles on various points, like firstly, the location in which the smooth muscles are usually present in the visceral organs. The skeletal muscles are usually present in the skeletal, are usually attached with the skeletal system, that is the bones. Smooth muscles lack the stripe-like pattern, they lack the striations, while the skeletal muscles have the striated pattern. Then the shape of the cell is different. In the skeletal muscle, it is cylindrical in shape. In the smooth muscles, it is spindle-shaped cells. Smooth muscles are found in the walls of viscera and therefore they are also known as visceral muscles. So viscera is the internal organs like intestine, stomach and other internal organs. And they are also present in the blood vessels. They contract more slowly. So their contraction is comparatively slow as compared to the smooth muscles. But the point here is they can remain contracted for a longer time as compared to the skeletal muscles. So what are the functions of these smooth muscles which are present in various organs? So in the stomach and intestine, smooth muscles contracts in the wave-like pattern, which is known as the peristalsis. So this peristalsis or the wave-like pattern helps in the movement of the food. So it helps in propelling the food through the digestive tract, through the digestive system. And when the smooth muscles of the intestine contracts, the food moves along its lumen, which is the central cavity. So suppose if this is the intestine and food enters in the intestine, when it contracts, so upon contraction, the food will move forward in the lumen. Now, what is the function of these smooth muscles in arteries and veins? So, smooth muscle constricts or dilates the vessels to maintain the normal blood pressure. So, in arteries and veins, smooth muscles are present that helps in maintaining the blood pressure. They are also present in the iris of this eye or in some parts of the skin. So, iris of the eye has two sets of smooth muscle fibers that constrict or dilate the pupil. So it helps in constriction and dilation of pupil. Therefore helps in maintaining the power of accommodation to the eye. Therefore, it regulates the amount of light that strikes the retina. So depending upon the whether the pupil is constricted or dilated, the amount of light that enters the eye and strikes the retina can be regulated. And this is regulated with the help of the set of smooth muscles which are present in the iris of the eye. So what we learned about the smooth muscles is that smooth muscles are involuntary. They are unstriped. They do not contain stripe. So they are also known as smooth muscles. And then they are present in the viscera. So they are also known as visceral muscles. Viscera, which is the internal organs. Fine. The shape of the smooth muscles is spindle shaped, while the shape of the skeletal muscles was cylindrical in nature. The next is the cardiac muscle. So as the name suggests, cardiac word is used for the heart. So these muscles are present in the heart of the living organism. The cells of the heart is also known as the cardiac muscles. These are branched, have one nucleus each, and they have faint striations. So you can see here they have faint striations. These striations are not dark as compared, like these striations are not as dark as present in skeletal muscles, but they have faint striations. So cardiac muscles are the muscles which are present in the heart of the cells, heart of the living organism. These are branched. They have one nucleus each and they have faint striations. Now, if I compare it with the skeletal muscles, each cell has many nuclei as compared to the cardiac muscle in which each cell has only one nuclei. So every cell has only one nucleus in the cardiac muscles and they are branched structures. The cell membranes at the end of these cells are somewhat folded and fit into the matching fold. So these cell membranes are like interconnected and properly into the fold of the next membrane. So they are interconnected or interdigitated. The interlocking folds are intercalated disc and permits the electric impulse of muscle contraction to pass swiftly from cell to cell. So this intercalated or interconnections help in passing the nerve impulse fastly to the cell, swiftly to the cell from one cell to another. This enables the heart to beat in a very precise wave of contraction from the upper chamber to the lower chamber. So they have intercalated disc that are formed due to the intercalation of that are formed due to the intercalation of the cell membrane with the cell membrane of next cell. So these are interdigitated and they help in the beating of the heart in the precise manner. Fine. So cardiac muscle as a whole is called as a myocardium and it forms the walls of 4 chambers of the heart. So we have 4 chambers: right auricle, right ventricle, left auricle, and left ventricle. So it helps in forming the muscles of the 4 chambers of the heart and it is known as the myocardium. Its function therefore is the function of heart to pump the blood. The contraction of the myocardium creates blood pressure and the blood pressure is enough to regulate or pump the blood outside the left ventricle so that it can be carried out to various organs. And therefore, it keeps the blood circulating throughout the body so that the blood can carry out its many functions. Cardiac muscle combines features of both smooth muscles and skeletal muscles. So, what are the similarities of the cardiac muscles with the smooth muscles is that the muscles or the contraction of the heart is involuntary like the smooth muscles. So we know that smooth muscles are involuntary in nature. While if I look at the structure of the cardiac muscles, as I mentioned, is somewhat similar to skeletal muscles. It has faint striations. Cardiac muscle cells also differ in that they have a single centrally placed nucleus. While in skeletal muscles, it is many nucleus placed at the periphery. So they have a peripheral arrangement of the nucleus, while in this it is the single centrally placed nucleus. So this is the summary of these 3 different types of muscular tissues. The first one is the skeletal tissues, which are voluntary, that are attached with the skeletal system. They have striated cells with multiple nuclei. They occur in muscles that are attached to the skeleton and they function in the voluntary movement of the body. Therefore, skeletal muscles or skeletal muscles are also known as striated muscles or voluntary muscles. Next, we have smooth muscles. So smooth muscles have spindle-shaped cells, each with a single nucleus. So unlike skeletal muscles where multiple nuclei are present within the cell, they have a single nucleus. Cells do not have any striations, no striations are present. But they function in the movement of substances in the lumen of body, like in the passage of food throughout the digestive tract, etc. They are involuntary in nature and they are found in the blood vessel walls and the walls of the digestive tract. So you can see here that each cell contains a single nuclei and they are also known as smooth muscles. Why? Because they do not have any striations and they are involuntary in nature. These are also visceral muscles. Why? Because they are present in the viscera, that is in the internal organs of the body. The last that we discussed was the cardiac muscle, which is a branched striated cells, each with a single nucleus. So there is the difference between the striated muscles or the skeletal muscles and the cardiac muscles in the fact that cardiac muscles have a single nucleus, but the skeletal muscles have the multiple nuclei. Due to this and myosin filaments that helps in the striated the skeletal muscles. So the cardiac muscles occurs in the wall of the heart and they are also known as myocardium. They helps in functioning the function is to pump the blood. So they helps in maintaining the blood pressure and in the pumping of the blood. They also help in maintaining the blood pressure and in the pumping of the blood. And these muscles are involuntary like the smooth muscles. So cardiac muscles has characteristics of smooth muscles and striated muscles, but still they are unique with the fact that these muscles do have striations, but their cells have a single nucleus which is centrally placed, unlike the nucleus of the skeletal muscle, which is peripherally placed. Next, they function involuntary like the smooth muscles. So, but unlike smooth muscles, they have striations, while smooth muscles do not have any striated pattern. These have faint striations, and one of the very important thing that we discuss is the interdigitation of the folds of the cell membrane into the other, because this interdigitation helps in the transformation of the impulse from one cell to another cell. Thereby, it helps in the beating of the heart. This is the structure. This is the table showing the like mentioning the structure, location, and function, and effect of nerve impulses on the three different types of muscular tissues. So, as we discussed in the skeletal tissues, they are large cylindrical cells. So, they are large cylindrical cells which have striations and several nuclei each. So, they are multinucleated. While if I talk about smooth muscles, they are small tapered cells. That is, they are spindle shaped with no striations and only one nucleus each. And in cardiac cells, these are again branched, but they have very faint striations. The striations are not as predominant as we see in case of skeletal muscles. They have very faint striations, and they have one of the very important features that differ in skeletal and cardiac muscle is that the cardiac muscle has only one nucleus in each cell. Now, on the basis of location and function, skeletal muscles are attached to bones. It helps in the movement of skeleton and produces the heat. Smooth muscles are present in the walls of arteries, where it helps in maintaining the blood pressure, and they are present in the walls of stomach. Also, it helps in the peristalsis that helps in the movement of the food throughout the digestive tract. They are present in the iris of the eye, where it regulates the size of the pupil, thus regulating the amount of the light entering the eye. Next, cardiac muscles. The cardiac muscles are present in the walls of the chambers of the heart that helps in pumping the blood. Now, what is the effect of nerve impulses on skeletal muscles? Skeletal muscles are essential to cause the contraction, and therefore they are voluntary in nature. Smooth muscles bring out the contraction or regulate the rate of contraction. They are involuntary in nature. That is, they cannot be regulated. Their function cannot be regulated on its own. While cardiac muscles can only regulate the rate of contraction, but still most of the functions are involuntary. So this was about the muscular tissues. The next is the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, one of the very important feature of nervous tissue is their lower power of regeneration. Very low power of regeneration. Instead, I should say very low power or capacity of regeneration. That is, these cells cannot renew if once they get damaged. So nerve tissue consists of nerve cells, which are called as neurons, and in the nervous system. So the nervous system has two divisions. The complete nervous system can be divided into two parts: peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves and nerve cells. So they are made, the brain and the spinal cord are the organs of CNS, and they are made up of neurons and specialized cells called neuroglia. The PNS consists of all the nerves that emerge from the CNS and supply the rest of the body. These nerves are made up of neurons and specialized cells called Schwann cells. What is the function of Schwann cells? They form the myelin sheath. So when you will see the structure of the neuron, you will see that it is covered with the myelin sheath. It may or may not be covered. So there are two types of neurons, myelinated and unmyelinated. So myelin sheath helps the Schwann, like the myelin sheath is formed by the Schwann cells, and it helps to electrically insulate the neurons. Neurons are capable of generating and transmitting the electrochemical impulses. They have the capacity to transmit the electrochemical impulse. There are many different kinds of neurons, but they have the same basic structure. So various neurons Neurons are capable of generating and transmitting the electrochemical impulses. That is, they have the ability to generate the electrochemical impulse and therefore helps in transmitting the information. There are many different kinds of neurons, but they have all the basic structures. Basic structures of the cell neurons. The basic structure of the neuron is that it consists of a cell body, it has an axon, and it has a dendrite. So the cell body, just like the other cells, so you can see this is the structure of the neurons. If in basic, I would like to make you understand. So it is the cell body that consists most of the cytoplasm and the nucleus part. These are the dendrites, which are the, you can compare it with the like the plant branches, and then this is the axon, which is the long part. So, which is the process. The cell body contains the nucleus and it's essential for continuing the life of the neuron. It mainly consists of the cytoplasm, and all the like most of the cytoplasm is concentrated within the cell body. An axon is a process. Why we have used the term process here? The process here means something that comes out or sticks out of a cellular extension. So it is a stick-like structure that comes out or protrude out of the cell extension. So it is a cellular extension. These impulse away from the cell body. So when an impulse is received by the dendrites, which are the branching structures, it then passes to the axon, and upon processing, it is then passed to the through the axon. It is then passed to the next neuron. So transmitted within the from one to another neuron. Then we have dendrites. Dendrites are the process that carry impulses towards the cell body. So as mentioned, any impulse that is being received by the dendrites is then passed on to the cell body, and from cell body to the another neuron, it is carried by the axon. So this figure shows the part of neuron with various functions. So firstly, it is the cell body, which is shown here in yellow color. So what is the function of cell body? It organizes and keeps the cell functional, as it has almost all the structural components of the cell. So all the structural components like cytoplasm, nucleus, etc. are present within the cell body. Structural components of cell are present within the cell body. So the nucleus, which is present in the cell body, is the function of the nucleus is to control the entire neuron. Then, as I mentioned, we have various dendrites, which are branch-like structures. We can see in the figure also that they are branch-like structures. They receive signals from other cells and pass it to the cell body. We have cell membrane around the cell body that protects the cell. It is a very important point. In the cell body, we have the axon hillock. Axon hillock is the point just above the axon, and it generates the impulses in the neuron. So impulses are generated at the point which is known as axon hillock, and from there it is then passed to the axons. We have axon that transfers the signals to other cells and organs. As I mentioned, myelin sheath, which is formed by the Schwann cells. So Schwann cells form the myelin sheath. What is the function of myelin sheath? Firstly, it provides the insulation. Second, it helps in speeding up the impulse transmission. So it increases the speed of the signal. Then we have nodes of Ranvier. So nodes of Ranvier are the gaps in the axons where the myelin sheath is absent, and it allows the diffusion of the ions. Schwann cells are the cells that produces the myelin sheath. So these cells are present and these cells help in production of the myelin sheath. And the last part is the axon terminal that forms the junctions with the other body, or there may be some other neuron in which the impulse is to be transmitted. So how an impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another neuron is by the connection which is known as the synapse. So synapses are the connections between the two neurons. So these are the connections between the neurons, and through these synapses, the nerve impulses are being transmitted from one neuron to the another neuron. So as I mentioned, the dendrites of one axon. So if I expand this figure, so considering this as axon and this as a cell body, we have various dendrites in this neuron. So dendrites receive the nerve impulse, which is then passed to the cell body, and through the axon, it reaches to the axon terminal. So this is the presynaptic neuron. So we have a synapse, and before the synapse, it is a presynaptic neuron, and after the synapse, it's the postsynaptic neuron. We can say that the incoming is from the presynaptic neuron, and the impulse is then transmitted to the postsynaptic neuron through the synapses that forms the synaptic gap. So how these impulses are being transmitted? The impulse are being transmitted with the help of the chemicals which are known as the neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters carry the impulse and help in the transmission of nerve impulse from the presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron. Now, on the postsynaptic neurons, the dendrites have the receptors for the neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitter then binds to the receptors which are present on the postsynaptic neuron. After this, the information is being transferred to the postsynaptic neuron. So a nerve impulse travels along the cell membrane of a neuron and is electrical in nature. But where neurons meet, there is a small space called a synapse through which electrical impulse cannot pass. Therefore, it is an electrochemical. That is why we say that the impulses are electrochemical in nature. So the electrical nature of the impulse is now being transferred to the chemical nature. And these chemicals are known as the neurotransmitters that help in carrying the impulses from presynaptic to the postsynaptic neurons. So at a synapse, between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite or cell body of the next neuron, impulse transmission depends upon chemicals. These chemicals are called as the neurotransmitters. That is why it is called as the electrochemical impulse. And as we see that the electrical nature of the impulse gets converted to the chemical nature, and once it enters again into the postsynaptic neuron, then the cell body which receives these signals will convert it into the electrical signals and will either transmit to another neuron or will transmit through its nerve endings into the other cells of the body, where it will carry out a particular function. So, beside neurons, in the nervous tissues, we have other types of cells which are known as neuroglial cells. Neuroglial cells outnumbers the neurons. That is, they are very they are more in number as compared to the neurons. We can say that for one neuron, we can say that there are approximately 50 neuroglial cells, and therefore it makes up more than half the volume of the brain. What is the primary function of the neuroglial cells is? The primary function is to provide the nourishment. So it provides the nourishment to the neurons, and these neuroglial cells do not have a long process. So unlike as we can say that in the neurons, it has a long process which is known as the axons. Neuroglial cells do not have a long process, and various types of neuroglials are found in the brain. For example, we have microglia, we have astrocytes, we have oligodendrocytes, etc. So microglia, what is the function of microglia? In addition to supporting neurons, what is the function of microglia is it engulfs the bacteria and cellular debris. Therefore, it has a function of phagocytosis. It engulfs the bacteria and all the cellular debris, preventing the cells from the infection. Then we have astrocytes that provides the nutrients to the neuron, and it produces a hormone which is known as GDGF, which is the glial-derived growth factor. And the research is being carried out on this. Why I'm mentioning this factor here is that because the research is nowadays being carried out on this to treat the Parkinson's and other diseases which are caused by the neuron degeneration. So therefore, scientists are now focusing on this hormone, which is the GDGF, that is the glial-derived growth factor, which is produced by the astrocytes. Then we have oligodendrocytes that forms the myelin. So this is the classification of the different neuroglial cells and their functions. So neuroglial cells are present in the central nervous system. They are part of peripheral nervous system as well. In the central nervous system, as I mentioned, we have astrocytes whose function is to provide the nourishment. It also regulates the iron and provides some metabolic support to the neurons. Then we have ependymal cells. What is the function of ependymal cells? It lines the spinal cord and ventricles of the brain. And it is also involved in the production of the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid which is present within the membranes of the brain and the spinal cord. Then we have oligodendrocytes. As I mentioned, the function of oligodendrocytes is the production of myelin sheath. So it myelinates the CNS axons. It provides the structural framework, thus providing the structural framework to the neurons. Microglia helps in the bacteria by engulfing them. In the peripheral nervous system, we have two types of neuroglial cells, satellite cells and Schwann cells. Satellite cells, they surround the neuron cell bodies in ganglia, and it regulates the neurotransmitter levels. So the function of satellite cells is it helps in transmission and in regulating the transmission from presynaptic to the postsynaptic neurons by controlling or regulating the amount of the neurotransmitter which is being released. Then we have Schwann cells. Schwann cells, as I have already mentioned, their function is to myelinate the neurons in the PNS. And it helps in regeneration of neurons after injury. However, the power of regeneration is very low. So therefore, once the neurons get damaged, it is really difficult to regenerate those neurons. And so one of the very important thing that we need to remember is that in the CNS, the function of oligodendrocytes is to myelinate the neurons of the CNS, while the neurons of the peripheral nervous systems are myelinated with the help of the Schwann cells. So both oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells are performing the myelination. That is, they are helping in myelinating the nervous neurons, but oligodendrocytes myelinate the neurons of the central nervous system, while Schwann cells myelinate the neurons of the peripheral nervous system. So this is the structure showing the neurons and the neuroglial cells. So we can see here, this is the neuron which is being shown. This is the synapse, which is the connection between the two neurons. It can be from the cell body to the dendrites. It can be from the axons, etc. Then we have astrocytes that function. What was the function of astrocytes? It helps in providing the nourishment. So it is usually in association with the blood capillaries. So it can provide nourishment and oxygen to the cells. Then we have ependymal cells. We have microglials that have the power of engulfing the bacteria, thus preventing it. This is a myelinated axon, which has the myelin sheath. So the myelin sheath is present, and the gaps between these is known as the nodes of Ranvier. Fine. So, in summary, the nervous tissue is made up of the following parts. It consists of a neuron, which consists of a nerve cell that has a cell body, axon, and dendrites. It has a synapse. It has neurotransmitters. It has neuroglia. It has Schwann cells. So, what is the function of cell body? It contains the nucleus. Axon is a cellular process, which is the extension. Dendrites are again the cellular process, but these are short extensions. So, this is a longer extension. This is a short extension. Synapse is the space between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite or cell body of the next neuron. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals which are released by the axons. Neuroglia are the specialized cells which are present in the central nervous system and are helping in the nourishment and in preventing the neurons to get infected. Schwann cells are present in the specialized cells which are present in the peripheral nervous system, and their function is to myelinate the neurons in PNS. So, for example, cell body regulates the functioning of the neuron. Axon carries the impulse away from the cell body, and dendrites carry the impulse towards the cell body. Synapse helps in transmission of impulse from one neuron to another neuron. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals that transmit impulse across the synapses in the form in which the impulses are being transmitted from the one neuron to another neuron through the synapse. Then the function of neuroglial cells in the CNS is to perform the myelin sheath and other functions like the prevention from the bacteria, forming the cerebrospinal fluid, etc. In Schwann cells, they form the myelin sheath around the neurons. So this is the summary of overall 4 different types of tissues which are present in the living organisms. Like they are epithelial tissues, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. Epithelial tissue consists of skin and lining of the digestive system. Then we have in connective tissue, we have bones, tendons, and blood. In muscle tissues, we have muscles that make bones move, that is the skeletal muscles, muscles surrounding the digestive tract, smooth muscles. We have heart. And nervous tissue consists mainly of brain and the nervous system, other nerves and neurons. So these in the next, the description of the epithelial tissue is that they have thin sheets, tightly packed cells covering the internal organs. They protect from dehydration and low friction surfaces. Then the description of connective tissue is that there are various types of cells and fibers that are held together by a liquid or a solid or gel, which is known as the matrix. So they have a matrix, they have proteins. Different proteins are present in the different types of tissues. For example, bone is made up of chondrocyte cells and osteocyte cells, and while the cartilage is made up of chondrocytes. So their function is to support and insulate. What muscle cells are of different types. They may be bundles of long cells called muscle fibers, and they are capable of shortening and contract. They have capability to contract and relax. Then we have it helps in the movement. The nervous tissues are long, thin cells with fine branches at the ends that are capable of conducting the electrical impulse. They are sensory in nature. They help in maintaining the communication within the body, and they help in the coordination of the body function. So this was all about the tissues that are being present. That are present in the. So this is about the tissues that are present within the living organism. From the next lecture, we will discuss about the organ system. So thank you for attending it.